So, this all started almost exactly a year ago. I had some friends over at my house. School had just started and we decided we wanted to have a final chill session before school got too intense. We hung out together and played some games on our computers until my parents went to bed. Then we snuck out. We went on a little adventure, smoked some weed, and after a few hours we went on our way back home. We walked on the sidewalk of a big road. This sidewalk has the road on one side and a fence on the other. The fence is a pretty tall, maybe 10 feet, barbed wire fence, and on the other side is just some really dense vegetation. While walking back, I start hearing some twigs snap and leaves rustling in the distance. I ask my friends if they can hear it, and they do, but they say it's probably just a squirrel. A very reasonable assumption. I ignored it, but the rustling started getting closer and closer. We could all hear it, and the rustling sounded as if something big was walking in the same direction as us. At this point, we were a bit unsettled, but we really didn't pay too much thought since there's a huge fence in between us, and realistically, what could it really be? After a minute of the rustling being maybe 20 feet away, it stopped. We kept on walking until suddenly the rustling was definitely no more than 5 feet away from the fence, and it was moving fast and sounded as big as a person. We could see the trees and bushes shake. We couldn't see whatever the thing was, but it freaked us out and we ran to the other side of the road, not caring if cars were coming. Thankfully they weren't. After a while, we mutually agreed that what happened was weird, but continued on doing what teenagers do until we went to bed. This happened around 1 a.m. A couple of weeks later, I was hanging out with one of the 3 friends I'd had over that night. We did the same routine, though this time sober, and snuck out at night and went on an adventure. As we were walking back home, we hit the start of the fence where that weird rustling had happened. I asked him, "Remember that time we heard that weird rustling sound? What do you think that could have been?" He replies, "We were all pretty high. Maybe it wasn't even real." Still kinda weird how we all heard the same thing though. And in that exact moment I heard the most spine-chilling shriek I have ever heard, literally coming from maybe a meter away from the fence. Our faces went pale and we bolted. This cry we heard could not have been anything human or animal. There are coyotes in my area and I have listened to recordings of their cries, but it wasn't anything like that. The closest thing I can compare it to is this viral video, only without the weird laughing part. However, this thing was literally right next to us. I don't know what this thing is, but I'm absolutely terrified to go anywhere near there again. But stay tuned. I'm planning on going back there soon. The mystery has been killing me. I'm going to bring a machete for both self-defense and going through the vegetation. Wish me luck. So I have been to the sugar mill at least 10 times. A few creepy things have happened to me there, but this is the weirdest. I usually have a pretty good memory, but I never seem to be able to remember the layout of this sugar mill. About 4 visits ago, I decided to go there with just me and my boyfriend of the time. We were on the first floor looking into the rooms that seemed to have been used as offices. When we walked into one of the rooms, there was a door to the right as you walk in. The door had stairs leading down to the basement, and me, never having noticed it before, wanted to go down. But my boyfriend, now ex, was being a pussy and said no. So we pressed on. He kept saying how he was getting creepy vibes and wanted to leave, but again I had been there many times before at night and nothing that bad had ever happened. For context, there are 6 different levels to this sugar mill. If you want to see a tour inside, there are videos on YouTube. We got to the 2nd floor and he was visibly sketched out. I was admiring the graffiti art and felt fine. We started up the next flight of stairs to the 3rd floor, and the second I stepped fully up the stairs I got a horrible feeling of dread wash over me, and I told him, "We need to leave now." We practically power walked out of there. I'm not sure what was up there, but I'm glad I didn't get to find out. The next time I went back I brought people who had never been there before, but this time the entire building had, mostly, all the entrances welded or bolted shut, although we still found a way in. I was excited to go down in this basement with them,
but when we got there it was gone. We looked for 30 minutes for any signs of it being covered up and tried to find it, but there was nothing besides an old door that was welded shut that led to the outside. Another thing I noticed when I got inside was that the elevator that was previously suspended on the 3rd floor had fallen to the ground floor and was half collapsed. I have a theory that someone came in and wanted to tag the inside of the elevator, and the cord snapped and they died. There was unfinished graffiti that I had not seen before inside, so that's when they really upped their game of trying to keep people out. If anyone that has been there has experienced anything creepy, or it seemed like things were changing, please comment. Warning: if anyone who lives in Colorado or is visiting and is planning to go there, wear face masks, because there is asbestos everywhere in the air. The ground is very unstable and there are lots of holes, especially on the top floor. If you wish to know the way in, as it is now impossible to get in without the correct tools and knowing the exact spot, message me or comment.
I lived in the same small neighborhood and house throughout my entire childhood. I guess you could say I knew the neighborhood pretty well. I grew up in a rural part of Oregon where it's heavily forested in all directions. One day I'm riding my dirt bike around my neighborhood. My neighbors didn't mind me riding on the streets as long as I wasn't reckless, and I decided to go up a driveway that led to a piece of abandoned, unowned property that was perfect for riding my dirt bike on. I had been there many times before and I loved it because it was out of the neighborhood, so I didn't have to worry about being safe. But this particular time, as soon as I got to the first open spot, I noticed it was littered with trash. I'll admit I rummaged through the garbage, but I did find some pretty neat things that clearly nobody else wanted. As I was looking through the papers that were left behind to look for a name to potentially give to the police, I had an eerie feeling come over me, like I was being watched from behind. I turned around and saw nothing. I was still really uncomfortable and constantly felt like I was being watched. I was getting ready to leave and take everything I had found back home. As I was walking to my bike, because I had parked it about 20 feet away, I had a serious urge to look over my right shoulder. I did so, and once I turned, I saw something slip behind a tree, like it was looking at me and tried hiding from me when it saw that I looked in its direction. I sat there for a few more seconds when I watched massive hands or paws grab the sides of the tree. This tree was probably about the size of a power pole and the hands wrapped almost all the way around it, so it had some good-sized hands. As soon as I saw those hands grab that tree, I was frozen solid. They were huge compared to the tree, and that's when I saw it. A 5-foot-tall, hairy figure poked its head behind the tree, looking me directly in the eyes. It didn't move towards me, and I sure as hell didn't move towards it. For a moment we just kind of stood there and stared at each other. It seemed like it was about to shit its pants out of fear just as much as I was. After a couple of seconds being frozen, I finally worked up the courage to look away and start my bike. I never turned my head back to see what it did after I started my bike. I rode out of there as fast as possible and immediately went home. I walked in the front door and my dad looks at me with a confused look. He says, "Are you good? You look like you've just seen a ghost." It's been years and someone bought the piece of property. The house is now within 20 feet from the tree where I had ran into whatever that thing was. I'd like to think it was some sort of Bigfoot, because that's what it looked like, except rather than being 8 feet tall, it was only 5 feet or so. So last week I had what is quite possibly my scariest encounter with the paranormal. At least that is what I make out of it. I can't explain it any other way. Just for general information, I work nights and I'm completely adjusted to a night schedule. The particular day in question, I had a day off and it took place around 1:30 a.m. Since it was so late, there isn't much I keep myself occupied. So what I decided to do was to call a friend of mine that also worked night shifts. He lived about 15 minutes away from me by car and agreed to meet up. In about 5 minutes I heard my doorbell ring and went to open the door. It was my friend. At that moment I didn't find anything odd, but after going over the situation, however, in hindsight I noticed a few things. I didn't see his car anywhere. It was odd he rang my bell and didn't text me, and how fast he actually got to my house. But like I said, at the time it didn't strike me as odd. Anyways, me and my friend went on a walk that lasted a little less than about 20 minutes. As we were approaching my street again, I heard a car honk behind me. I turned to look and wondered who would be honking this late at night. I made a snarky comment about it and turned to my friend to see his reaction. However, he wasn't there. I looked all around, but he had just vanished. I was totally confused. In that moment of time, the car that had honked pulled up beside me, and I realized that it was my friend's car. He rolled down his window and asked me why I hadn't waited for him. I didn't know what to say at that point, so I told him that I figured that I would meet him on the road. I sat in his car and we went back to my place, but I didn't talk much. I had no clue what had happened. I considered that it was a hallucination, but it just didn't make sense. If you've encountered anything similar, what happened? It's been more than a week and I'm still confused. I went on a walk with a ghost disguised as my friend.
I grew up on a farm in what I thought was the best house a young boy could ever live in. The farmhouse was a very old 8-bedroomed manor house. Don't get me wrong, we weren't a well-to-do family or anything. It was that came with the farm we managed. It was cold, drafty and mouldy, but these things were of little concern to a 5-year-old boy whose main focus was exploring, making bows and arrows and chasing chickens. The last two are not connected, by the way. In fact, we didn't even use most of the rooms upstairs, as there was only my folks and me. The things I'm about to tell you honestly didn't seem to be a big deal to my young self, but I can assure you that if I was to experience anything like that now, I can tell you with no uncertainty I would have gotten the hell out of there. The first of which happened not long after moving in. I was playing out in the front garden when I saw my folks acting strangely at the side of the property. They had noticed a bricked up window on the west side of the house, but the placement of the window didn't make sense as it didn't correspond to the room that should be there. It took my dad going up to the room and hanging out of the window next to it and shouting down to my mum for them to realise that the room they were in was walled off and made quite a bit smaller. My dad contacted the farm owner, a nice old man from what I remember, who was just as intrigued as my folks as he'd never actually lived on the farm himself, although like me he'd played there as a boy and he'd never known the room to be any bigger. The decision was reached to knock down the false wall that separated the room. Just for the record, my mum was dead against it. She very much adopted a let sleeping dogs lie kind of approach. What we found, or more accurately, they found, as I wasn't allowed to help, was an almost perfectly preserved room painted entirely in green. Well, I say perfectly, it was full of dust, now more so from the brick wall that had just been knocked down. There was quite a bit of mildew and a very musty sweet smell. Other than that, a pretty normal bedroom. It seemed to have belonged to a girl, partly because of the dolls and stuffed toys on the bed. There was a dressing table with some beauty art on it. Some old photos were in the dressing table drawer, so the landowner took them away to see if he could identify any of the people in the photos. Depending on how you look at it, that in itself was a little creepy and unnerving. At least I think so now, though at the time I don't remember being bothered by it. I just remember feeling put out by not being able to explore the house. But the really unsettling thing was yet to come. The plan was to restore the bricked up window, although that never happened while we were there. A few days later, while there were a couple of contractors in tidying up the green room and making it back into one room, my dad decided he was going to check out the cellar. At the bottom of the cellar steps was a large wooden door. It was locked, and on top there were 2 metal bars across the door. They were at the top and bottom with old rusty padlocks on them. We had a key for the door but not for the padlocks. My dad got the permission to remove the old locks, which he did, and it turned out the key we had for the door didn't work anyway. So he gave it a shove. The door was solid but it popped open. Now, considering I wasn't allowed to be there to see the green room opened up, why the hell I was allowed to explore a spooky cellar I do not know. What we found was quite unsettling. The cellar was absolutely huge. almost the footprint of the entire house and mostly empty. Apart from a nursery, a fully kitted out kids' nursery, albeit old. It must have been for twins. There were 2 cribs, a rocking chair, toys, and basically everything in a normal nursery. It was just in a freaking cellar. Like I say, at the time, this stuff really didn't bother me, but now I can't stop thinking about it. I have no idea what happened in that old farmhouse. Now I'm older, I'd love to know, but my folks are old and their memories are fuzzy, and the old landowner has now since passed. Like I say, I loved living there as a boy, but I recently drove past that old house and it now looks creepy as hell to me. The window was still bricked up.